Whenever we answer God's calling and God reappears to us and we build an altar for God, telling Him that everything we are and have is for Him, we shall immediately erect a tent. Spontaneously, people will see that this is an expression, a declaration that we do not belong to this world. By pitching a tent, we declare that we belong to another country. We do not belong to this country. We are looking for a better one. We do not like this country, this earth, this world. We expect to come into another country. We are sojourning by faith as in a strange country, waiting with expectation for a city with foundations. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 10 says that Abraham waited for the city which has the foundations, whose architect and maker is God. This city which has foundations is undoubtedly the New Jerusalem, which has solid foundations laid and built by God. While Abraham was living in a tent without any foundations, he was looking and waiting for a city with foundations. But I do not believe that Abraham knew that he was waiting for the New Jerusalem. Even many Christians do not know that what they are waiting for is the New Jerusalem. But we have to be clear that we are living in the tent of the church life today, waiting for its ultimate consummation, which will be the New Jerusalem, the city of God with foundations. Living in the shadow of the New Jerusalem, Abraham's tent was a miniature of the New Jerusalem, which will be the ultimate tabernacle of God in the universe. As he lived in that tent, he was living in the shadow of the New Jerusalem. While he was living there with God, he was waiting for a city that eventually will be the New Jerusalem. The New Jerusalem, the eternal tabernacle, will replace that temporary tent in which Abraham lived. Abraham's tent was a seat of God's eternal dwelling place. This seat grew in the tabernacle erected by his descendants in the wilderness, and its house will be the New Jerusalem, the tabernacle of God with men. God still needs to have such a seed in all of us. We all need to be those who live in a tent and who look forward to a better country, a country in which there will be the eternal tabernacle, where God and we and God will live together for eternity. Abraham's interest was altogether in a better country. Although God had told him that he would give the land to Abraham and his descendants, Abraham did not care for that. He was looking for another country and for a city with foundations. Eventually, the Bible tells us that this better country is the new heaven and the new earth, and that the city with foundations is the New Jerusalem, the eternal dwelling place for God and for all his called ones. Today, we are repeating the life and history of Abraham. Once there was only one Abraham, now there are many. The church life today is the harvest of the life and history of Abraham. Abraham's life by faith is presently being repeated among us. We all are here building an altar and pitching a tent. Look at the church life. We have an altar and a real tabernacle. This is a picture of the coming New Jerusalem, where we shall spend eternity with God. The Bible ends with a tent. The New Jerusalem is the ultimate tent, the ultimate tabernacle in the universe. Maybe one day Abraham will meet with God in the New Jerusalem, and God will say, Abraham, don't you remember that day when we feasted together in your tent? Your tent was a miniature of the eternal tabernacle. Abraham's tent was a seed. The growth of that seed is in Exodus, and its harvest is in Revelation 21. In principle, there is no difference between Abraham's tent and the New Jerusalem, the ultimate tent. If I were Abraham meeting with God in the New Jerusalem, I would say, Lord, I remember the day you came to my tent. Now I come to your tent. Life Study of Genesis, Message 42, The Trial of the Called. In this message, we come to Abraham's experience of trials. We have seen how Abraham was called by God and how by God's appearing, he was strengthened to answer that call. We have also seen that by God's appearing, Abraham was brought to the very place where God intended him to be. Firstly, he was brought to Shechem, and then to the place between Bethel and Ai, the place between the house of God and the heap of ruins. That place between the house of God and the heap of ruins was the high point, and Abraham should have remained there. However, suddenly, after such a high attainment in his experience of God, Abraham continued his journey, going toward the south. In studying this chapter, I have spent much time to find out the reason why Abraham continued his journey. Why did he journey on and not remain there between the house of God and the heap of ruins? Abraham had attained the high point, the place where God intended for him to be. By God's mercy, we should have remained there. But Abraham journeyed southward. This means that he went downward. After such a high attainment in the experience of God, any journey would be downward. This continuing of his journey was the cause of Abraham's failure.